dijeron negro y todos me señalaron. Dijeron igualdad, pero esta vez me separaron. Dijeron mucho, pero no se olvidaron de callarse. Cuánto odio por mi piel sembraron. Dijeron historia y la tergiversaron. Dijeron guerra, muerte, odio y nos culparon. Enfermedades, epidemias nos contagiaron. Exterminación de mi fauna complace a tus mercados. Dijeron riqueza y todos se lo robaron. Oro, platino, diamante, a la fuerza se lo llevaron. Y la actualidad es tan triste que todo aquello que dijeron es lo mismo que hoy se dice más. ¿Quién dice, quién explota, quién se beneficia? El asesino, el mismo que da las noticias. Hay una cuenta fácil que siempre me da las grandes riquezas, de dónde vienen y hacia dónde van.
Independiente como los Mao Mao, concluyente como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao. Somos resistentes como los Mao Mao, independiente como los Mao Mao, concluyente como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao. Somos resistentes como los Mao Mao. Nati Dre es afroresistencia, cultura ancestral, afrodescendencia, solidaridad. Esa es la esencia, la diáspora africana eleva la conciencia, conciencia negra, universal, progresista y transcultural. Negros y mestizos revolucionando, pueblos caribeños y africanos en un solo bando. No más explotación, colonialismo interno, no más confusión, supremacía blanca en el Babilón. Soy rojo, negro y verde, afroliberación. Mientras más negro, más represión. Somos creadores, recupera tu visión. Mi misión es educar con amor, contra el silencio, vivo sin temor. Independiente como los Mao Mao, concluyente como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao. Somos resistentes como los Mao Mao, independiente como los Mao Mao, concluyente como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao. Somos resistentes como los Mao Mao.
What's happening, good people? It's the Rise Up Morning Show. We got Boona and Isaac in the building. They both looking like they wide awake, wide awoke. You know what I'm saying? Boona's favorite guest will be on here today. I'm not gonna tell you who it is. Boona put on his best shawl. You know what I'm saying?
Best haircut.
He got his best haircut. You know what I'm saying? Isaac came through looking sharp. He's like, I'm gonna wear my yellow shirt today. Because in fact, I wanted to be lemon scented. Anyway, I'm Kalanji Changa alongside these two gentlemen. And today, as always, we bring you the Rise Up Morning Show, the Rise Up International Morning Show. You know what I'm saying? You got Boona joining us from the Holy Land of France. You know what I'm saying? One of some of y'all favorite colonizers, they reside over there. And over here in the US, you got Isaac over on the West Coast, you know what I mean? Set tripping, you know what I mean? And I'm in ATL, home of the thief and the slave.
They call it, was it who banging? No, I'm just playing.
Who banging? Look at that, man. See, there you go, man. We ain't into that terminology, brother. We ain't set tripping. But anyway, first off, I want to say salute to all the good people out there still weathering the storm. Some of our comrades, shout out to my man Doc down in Augusta, Georgia. Received word that they still don't have gas, water, electricity, due to the Hurricane Helene. I understand that it's supposed to be the 14th deadliest hurricane in recorded history, I believe, in the U.S., but in recorded history, I'm not sure if it's just the U.S. or whatever, but that's what the word on the street was. We were out of power over here for a couple of days. Electricity was down, flooded, so on and so forth. Trees, knocked down on both ends of the street.
How many states were affected?
To my understanding, I believe 4. So Florida, South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and there were dozens of casualties. Also, I may have mentioned a couple mornings ago that there was a chemical fire blast here in Georgia as well. Some people had to evacuate there. Some of my family members, in fact, had to evacuate and go to another location. There was water breaks, Of course, we know it's the longshoreman strike that's still going on. We know that wars going on across the seas, you know what I mean, and war here on the street, because the police, they ain't letting up. They still gunning people down. They still locking people up, so on and so forth. But this is what comes with war, in the words of Imam Jamil Al-Amin, formerly H. Rap Brown. Speaking of Imam Jamil Al-Amin, on Friday, tomorrow, the 4th, we will be commemorating his born date, his birthday. For folks who are not familiar, Imam Jamil Al-Amin is formerly known as H. Rap Brown. During the 60s, he was a serious freedom fighter. Of course, he still is. He was chairman of SNCC one time, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He was honorary Minister of Justice for the Black Panther Party, and so much more. He became Muslim inside of the prison camps, and then he became an imam. I'm a part of his community here in Atlanta, and he's a powerful brother who was, who they framed, same judge that framed Kamal Siddiqui here in Atlanta, Stephanie B. Manis, may she rest in peace. They framed this brother, and because they had to snatch him off the street, because he was and still is a serious organizer. I'm saying all that to say that tomorrow, Friday the 4th, he will be 81 years old, and there'll be some rallies taking place and protests, I'm sure, around the world, but particularly here in Atlanta at the Malcolm X Park, formerly known as West End Park. We officially changed the name ourselves. We're not waiting for the city to tell us, where we reside and where we do our thing. It'll be right across the street from the masjid that he started in Atlanta, in the West End of Atlanta, the first full-time masjid, the West End Community Masjid. Like I said, the protest rallies will take place at the Malcolm X. That will be at 2 p.m., 2:30. Just be out there. Make sure y'all come through. Pull up. There'll also be a caravan that's going downtown. So again, October 4th, tomorrow, 2:30 p.m. Let's say that, just in case some of you are running late. We'll say 2 p.m. because some of y'all will be late anyway. Make sure you come out and support our freedom fighter, Imam Jamil Al-Amin, formerly known as H. Rap Brown. Also, on this Sunday, there will be a tribute, as I mentioned previously, yesterday, there'll be a tribute for Bilal Sunni Ali, who is another freedom fighter. Matter of fact, I took my Shahada with him. He was a witness inside of that masjid that I was talking about, in the West End 20 years ago or so. Bilal Sunni Ali, as I mentioned before, he is a freedom fighter. He was a comrade of folks like Mutulu Shakur, Sekou Odinga, Imam Jamil, etc. He was one of the people that was charged or indicted in the Brinks truck robbery. And he had a number of different co-defendants, some of which I mentioned. And he, like I said, freedom fighter with the Panther Party. BLA also was a renowned, and still is a renowned musician. He's played with Gil Scott's Midnight Band. There's a real dope piece they did on Saturday Night Live where you had Richard Pryor hosting it. And it's a classic piece where him and Gil Scott-Heron and those folks, was rocking on there. But, a sax player, a flautist, etc. We will be doing a living tribute to him right on his platform on Sunday at 4 p.m. EST. Sunday, 4 p.m. EST. I did mention the piece for Imam Jamil, that is EST. I'm forgetting it's an international platform, and sometimes we just be splitting numbers out. We don't want Isaac to be late, so we want to make sure that we give him the right time. Anyway, you're checking out the Rise Up Morning Show. How you brothers doing today?
You're muted. Still muted.
Okay, I thought I was muted.
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. How are you guys? How's everybody?
Good.
We good. We got
That's it. That's it, Buna. Just good. You know.
Boona's excited because he has his guest coming.
Yeah, Buna's mind's already on the second hour of the show.
Yeah.
I'm very nervous.
No
Not
doubt.
every day that you get these guests.
The individual is very huge. The individual is very big, and I can understand why. Yeah, if you want to, let's get into. I believe we have some Stop ECOP information to give the African masses. If you'd like to start with that.
Yeah, this is something that we have talked about. Don't know exactly. I guess it was 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Or first, before we get into that, I don't know if you want to, if we're still going with it, but I thought this was funny yesterday.
Oh yeah.
That this came out. I don't know if you guys see or recognize this person.
Oh man, look at that! That's a wonderful thing. I saw that. So for folks who are not familiar, that is Netanyahu, the chief thief and criminal over in Israel. Zionist Israel, and I see that he's training for the next Olympics. I guess he's training for.
He's coming to LA.
Coming to LA. Okay.
2028.
He's running.
Already put that bid in. Running as fast as he can to that bunker.
Oh my goodness! Look at that. All the shit he talking. He getting loose.
No, you guys are wrong. He was not running. He was actually preparing for the retaliation that he has promised.
Oh, that's what he's doing. He's going to get the strap. He's going to get the strap. That's what's going on, Boona.
Yeah.
Someone said they're having Hamas for lunch, and he ran. No.
Isaac's comedy show only played here on Rise Up. Yeah. Anyway, man, this dude is but running like that, that bunker must be right there because he's trying to play it off like he's not.
That bunker running. Looks like it's far away, man. He can't run as fast as he can.
Yeah. Anyway, take that clown off our screen, man. For they try to say that we was trying to prevent his Olympic tryouts and whatnot. But it's really interesting. I heard he was shaking in his boots, quaking. I mean, according to mercenary media, they've been talking like Israel didn't get hit at all. Did you all hear anything about that? Or
I covered it extensively yesterday on Indigenous Nightmare Network. For which I was able to debunk a lot of what the Pentagon was trying to spew, acting like they don't know exactly what happened, trying to deflect away from the truth. It is 90% of the missiles that were thrown out in the direction of Tel Aviv and the occupied territories of Palestine hit directly where they were supposed to hit. It was infrastructure. They were looking at making sure that airports were destroyed, that whole entire fuel ports were destroyed. They didn't target civilians as we've seen the Israeli occupation do time and time again. What they did is they did exactly what they said, is that they're targeting their infrastructure, i.e. their military infrastructure, which meaning we're going to debuckle you in ways that you it's unfathomable. And the fact that they're trying to fight essentially now 3 fronts and asking for more military aid, asking for now on the ground troops, is just a clear sign that Israel's full and sole intentions are to create a reality that is World War III. We're on the brink of them pushing Middle Eastern, West Asian countries, sovereign nations that have self-determinized themselves as individuals that have a divine right within Western Asia. They completely disregard international law by attacking them and by trying to manipulate individuals by using this term terrorist to try and describe what's going on. If I'm not mistaken, you're in occupied territory, so i.e. you're the terrorist. So how does the person who's resisting against you become the terrorist? They use manufactured consent, as someone like Noam Chomsky would iterate, but also they use a tactic of manipulation. An individual by the name of Stuart Hall, I highly advise individuals to read up on. He comes from CLR James, that tree of dialectical materialism and Pan-Africanism, and openly, goes into in depth the same way that even Malcolm X would go into when he talks about the puppets and the clowns, is we have individuals that are propagated in this so-called society that try and justify what's going on in West Asia to the Arab people. So yesterday I was able to debunk that the Pentagon knew exactly what happened. They knew exactly what was targeted. They knew exactly who they're standing up against. People also have to realize too that the founder of Zionism is Theodore Herzl. Theodore Herzl used to write letters to Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes was an individual that the name Rhodesia came out of. For which now is formerly known as Zimbabwe, after they got their self-determination and liberation from imperial powers. Used to write letters to this individual and classified in these letters that Zionism is colonization. So they can play in our face right now and say that that this is a justifiable act, but it isn't under any value of international law, whether they create it or someone else does. And I think that's really where we're at. And the guest that's going to be on is someone that knows this really all too well. And so I'm really happy that for one yesterday that we seen a sign from the resistance, from a large portion of the resistance, because a lot of people don't understand that Iran has one of the biggest military brigades, one of the biggest military just collective when it comes to resistance. A lot of nations get trained in that area to combat things like Zionism and Western expansion, in West Asia and into their countries. It took a lot, of might for Iran to not do what they did yesterday, but they did it in response to continued violations of international law, i.e., completely debuckling the infrastructure of Lebanon in a way that if that were say Russia, or if that was China, then it would be a violation of international law. But since Israel has done it, they continuously, as we've seen for the past 77 years, going on 77 years, them continuously violate international law on a level that no one has ever seen before. They completely destabilized the infrastructure of Lebanon within a matter of days. They used 5,000 pound, not 2,000 pound, 5,000 pound new bombs in order for them to kill Nasrallah, the leader, one of the leaders of Hezbollah. That in of it itself is not going to stop. They want mass escalation, and they continue to show it on every level and on every front. They want U.S. intervention, but U.S. intervention only comes at the behest of the individual that wants war. And right now we're transitioning into who's going to be the next head of the next master of this occupation. And we will see then who will pull the trigger on U.S. troops being sent out to West Asia to continue the expansion of imperialism. I know I spoke a lot there, so I do apologize.
No, that's all good. I mean, we definitely appreciate you sharing some insight. Also, we want folks to go back to yesterday's show. We had Dr. Ramsey on yesterday, and he is from Palestine Chronicle. So I think he did an excellent job at laying it out. And Isaac sounded like his student right now because he was going in. So definitely make sure that you check that out. You're checking out the Rise Up Morning Show, and we're going to go to a quick break, and we're going to come back with a very special guest, someone that always has Boona smiling. So Boona don't smile too much. So we have a special guest coming on, and we're going to be right back at you in a minute. This is
for the last 30 minutes, we've been discussing Gaza. We've been discussing the settler colony of Israel. We've been discussing Yemen and Ansar Allah. Why should African Americans care? That is something on my radio show, Inside the Issues on Sirius XM, that people call in and ask all the time. Wilmer, you spend all this time talking about the Palestinians. Wilmer, you spend all the time, pick up what's happening in Venezuela, what's happening in Argentina, what's happening in Peru. Why should we care? Now, you just touched on a bit of it, but explain to my audience as African Americans, why does this matter to us?
Well, first of all, I pay quite a bit in taxes, and I'm sure there are many in your audience who do the same. Politics, amongst other things, is about where do your tax dollars go. Now, if those who call in to your other programs and object to talking about foreign policy, I guess they don't care where their tax dollars go. Well, sorry, I do care where my tax dollars go. I just mentioned that $1 trillion is spent annually on the Pentagon, which can't seem to win a war anywhere. So obviously, there is a mismatch of revenue, taxes, and purposes, war, when we should have a match between revenue, taxes, and education and healthcare. Secondly, with regard to historic Palestine in particular, that conflict could trigger World War III. Now, maybe there are those in your audience who think that there's some sort of black neutron bomb. Recall that the neutron bomb under Ronald Wilson Reagan, it killed people but left property standing. I guess they think that a neutron bomb would kill everybody except black people, and so therefore we don't have to be concerned. Well, I think that that's science fiction of the worst kind. And then we also know that there is a disproportionate percentage of black people in the military. It's no accident, as historians like to say, that the top military man and the top civilian in the military are both black Americans. Lloyd Austin, chief of the Pentagon, C.Q. Brown, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You might have noticed that in the anti-affirmative action decision rendered by the U.S. Supreme Court about 8 or 9 months ago, they had a special carve out for U.S. military academies, for West Point, the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, because those who rule this country recognize that because of the horrendous history that we've suffered, that's bred a culture of fighting. I wrote a whole book about boxing where I tried to explain why there was a disproportionate percentage of black Americans excelling in the sweet science, Muhammad Ali, Joe Louis, Jack Johnson, Sugar Ray Leonard, the list is long. And likewise, that feeds and bleeds into the military. You know that during the conflict in Vietnam, one of the startling aspects of that genocidal conflict was the disproportionate number of black Americans who were killed during this war because we were overrepresented. Not to mention the disproportionate percentage who were subject to court-martial and other kinds of pulverizing penalties. So there are so many reasons of why we should be concerned beyond just being humanitarians, beyond just being folks who are concerned about our own future, because when these wars happen, inevitably what happens is that it puts wind in the sails of many of our chief antagonists right here at home. And they might get the bright idea that if the Israelis can liquidate willy-nilly the Palestinians, perhaps the Israeli comrades here in North America can liquidate willy-nilly their long-term antagonists, speaking of black folk. So it's a shame that we have to spend time explicating the obvious, because explicating the obvious prevents us from going on to discuss more knotty and difficult questions to our detriment.
Excellent piece indeed.
Sorry, I cut you off there, Come on, Dante, my bad. I cut you off.
So it's all bad, man. It's all good. There was Dr. Horne on the mix. You know, it's always good to have you know, one of our giants, one of our important voices in our people's liberation movement, someone who can come from a scholarly perspective but make it plain for the masses. So we're definitely grateful for that. Bona, I know that you have something that you're going to share with the folks, and I think that you know, we should get see if we can get someone we know on board. What you got for us, Bona?
Yeah, so just wanted to share very quickly because our guest is already here. So today we're going to talk about the Zionist assault on Black solidarity, not only Black solidarity of Palestine, Black anti-Zionism, but also Black anti-colonialism. Okay, so this is an appeal by Black Americans against the United States support for the Zionist government of Israel. So this was published in the New York Times on November 1st, 1970, and was actually a response to another ad that was published in the New York Times by, Black supporters of Israel, including Wyatt Rustin, who, as you all know, was one of the founders and leaders of the Black Americans Support for Israel Committee. Actually, they wrote a piece in the New York Times asking for the U.S. government to provide fighter jets and funding to Israel. In response, other Black Americans, Black organizations wrote this appeal in the New York Times, in which they were basically calling Black Americans to stand with the Palestinian people. So I'm just going to read one or two. So it says, "We, the Black American signatories of this advertisement, are in complete solidarity with our Palestinian brothers and sisters who, like us, are struggling for self-determination and an end to racist oppression." So we say the Palestinian Revolution is the vanguard of the Arab Revolution and is part of the anti-colonial revolution, which is going on in places such as Vietnam, Mozambique, Angola, Brazil, Laos, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. So it was written before the independence or before the liberation movement in these countries actually defeated their colonial masters. Okay, so the reason why we thought that this was important to share to our audience is because we wanted to showcase the long tradition of Black solidarity with Palestine and also Black internationalism and Black anti-colonialism, especially for people who live in the diaspora. And to discuss this, so to discuss the Zionist assault on Black solidarity with Palestine and Black anti-colonialism, we are very honored and pleased, delighted to be joined by a very, very guest, whom most of our audience is already familiar with. So our guest is a historian and longtime political activist in anti-racist, Pan-African, and working-class struggles. He holds the Moores Professorship of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston. He has written over 40 books on a wide range of issues, including Black internationalism, the music and film industry, imperialism, class struggles, settler colonialism, of course, and white supremacy. His most recent books, published this year, include I Dare Say, with Gerald Horne reader, and also his latest book, was published 2 months ago, Panthers and Black Armed Struggle, ? Panthers and Communists, Black Nationalists and Liberals in South California through 60s and 70s. So Isaac already got his copies, but I haven't got mine. Hopefully I'll get mine soon. So I guess he's also a permanent guest on the radio show Report on Diasporic Music, which airs on Black Power 96 Radio on Sundays at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. He's also the co-producer and host of Freedom Now, a weekly Pan-African internationalist anti-imperialist program, which airs on KPFK 90.7 FM on Saturdays at 11 a.m. Pacific and can be found at kpfk.org. Both shows replay on Activist News Network YouTube channel. So our guest was trained as a lawyer, and he has been at the forefront of the anti-apartheid struggle in the US in the 1980s as the president of the National Conference of Black Lawyers, and it was in that context that he became involved in the solidarity movement with the people of Palestine, because as you all know, Israel has been a key ally of apartheid South Africa back then, and his involvement in the solidarity movement with Palestine, of course, triggered a fierce reaction from the Zionist lobby that is still going on as we speak. So I guess everybody has guessed who our guest today is. So Dr. Gerald Horne, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, Dr. Horne, today we want to talk about the Zionist assault on Black, not only Black solidarity with Palestine, but also Black anti-colonialism, which you've written extensively about. So we've drafted a series of questions that Mark and I will also. The first question will be asked by Comandante Kalanji.
Hey, how you doing, Dr. Horne? How's everything going?
It's all good.
Okay. He said it's all good. If you say it's all good, then it's great then. You know what I mean? If Boona says it's all good, it's different. Right on. So, yeah, definitely happy to have you on again today. As Boona mentioned, and we appreciate Boona and his hard work. We know that many of your books and articles and or interviews, you've described how the Zionist lobby in the United States have tried to discredit, demonize, and or undermine Black individuals, activists, and or organizations who are critical of the policies of the Zionist settler state, Zionist settler colonial state, vis-a-vis the Palestinians or even regarding Africa. For example, in your book titled White Supremacy, Confronted U.S. Imperialism and Anti-Communism versus the Liberation of Southern Africa from Rhodes to Mandela, you describe how the Zionist organization has infiltrated and spied on anti-apartheid activists in an attempt to, pretty much run them into the ground. Could you give us more background on these hostile Zionist activities and how it affected the organizations you belong to?
Well, thank you for inviting me. The question you asked, we could spend the next few hours talking about, but I'll just reference an incident that involved myself that's recounted in the book that you just mentioned. That is to say that when I was living in Southern California, I hosted Chris Hani, who was then a leader of both the African National Congress and the South African Communist Party. This was in Los Angeles before South African independence in 1994. And it turns out that the Zionist lobby in the United States was spying on that particular event. As it turns out, they had agents within the San Francisco Police Department, which of course is 400 miles due north of Los Angeles, where we were sited. And I find this to be relevant because you may know that after Chris Hani returned from Southern California back to his homeland, this anointed successor to Nelson Mandela, who was perceived widely to be in the vanguard of radicalism in Southern Africa, was assassinated. And interestingly enough, he was assassinated while jogging in his neighborhood by a Polish immigrant, interestingly enough. And that episode, which has had so much impact on the subsequent trajectory of South Africa, has yet to be investigated thoroughly. Now, to get to brass tacks, there's a fundamental contradiction, I'm afraid to say, between the struggles of enslaved Africans, followed by those we refer to as Black Americans, and those who have been inducted into the hallowed halls of whiteness, including those of Jewish ancestry. Now, our friends on the left, they have capitulated to philosophical idealism. You could actually call it right-wing opportunism, because their story is that when the United States was founded in this secession from the British Empire in 1776, that one of the reasons that Jewish Americans were treated more benevolently on this side of the Atlantic as opposed to in Europe was because of enlightenment, so-called philosophical enlightenment, digging deeper roots in North America, for example. That was their theory of the case. Now, since they're supposed to be scientists of society, they should recognize that they're putting thought before action. What they should have examined is that the settlers in North America needed every warm body they could muster in order to confront the indigenous, loot the indigenous, plunder and pillage the indigenous while keeping the Africans in line. And that opened the door for a concord, an entente with the Jewish diaspora, which happened to be key to one of the reasons why, if you look at this hemisphere, if you look at the Americas, you'll see that most of those in this hemisphere speak either Spanish or Portuguese, with the minority speaking French, all of whom, of course, are products of Catholic colonial powers, Portugal, Spain, and France. Whereas we here in the area north of Cuba are speaking English. And of course, England capitulating to the Protestant sect as early as the 1530s. And the Protestant sect, being the underdog, found it necessary to turn its back on England's history, which had involved the expulsion of the Jewish minority as early as the late 13th century. But by the 1500s, they could not afford that kind of bigotry. So they established a concord with the Jewish diaspora, which allowed them to defeat the Spanish in this region, in this territory, now known as the United States of America. Part of this history, which I'm telescoping, is reported in my book, The Dawning of the Apocalypse, which deals with that struggle in some detail. But it's clear that our friends on the left, they're more comfortable with philosophical idealism and right-wing opportunism as opposed to reality. And so therefore, they have a hard time understanding how and why it is that U.S. imperialism is on the verge of going over the cliff, hand in hand with Israel, in this confrontation with Iran, which could draw in Iran's allies, including North Korea, China, and Russia, which could trigger not only World War III, but a massive defeat for U.S. imperialism. They have a hard time understanding the underlying historical forces, and so therefore they default to denouncing individuals. Now, I'm not opposed to denouncing individuals. I'm not opposed to denouncing Biden or Harris or Trump or J.D. Vance or Tim Walz. But as scientists of society, we should have a deeper analysis if we're going to persuade people beyond the subjective. If we're going to persuade people to understand how and why it is that the Zionists ganged up on Cori Bush, the congresswoman from St. Louis, defeated in a primary in August 2024 after millions were spent, while they defeated Jamal Bowman, a black congressman from Bronx, Westchester, just before that. Because fundamentally, if you look at settler colonialism in North America, it's involved this fundamental contradiction. That is to say that settler colonialism amongst the settlers, not only the European settlers, but I'm afraid to say some non-European settlers who were inducted into the halls of whiteness. I'm thinking of some from the Lebanese Christian community, such as the actor Marlo Thomas, the activist Ralph Nader, or even the Egyptian Christian community. Speaking of Hoda Kotb, who just turned her back on a $20 million salary sitting alongside George W. Bush's daughter on the Today Show. And so that concord between and amongst those who are warring on the shores of Europe involved class collaboration. That has been the essence of the story of European settler colonialism up to this very day, with Sean O'Brien, the head of the Teamsters Union, speaking at the Republican convention in Milwaukee just a few months ago, with Harold Daggett, the leader of the mobbed up International Longshore Association, which I wish them well in their strike, but it's no secret that he's a close comrade of Donald J. Trump. Ironic for a union leader. So there's class collaboration amongst the settlers, and amongst the enslaved, by necessity, there has been class struggle. That is the essence of the Haitian Revolution, 1791 to 1804. That is the essence of why there has been so much conflict between the enslaved and the settlers, which extends to this very day, whereby there are conflicts between descendants of the enslaved and descendants of the settlers. And once again, I find it curious, and assuming we're able to survive World War III, I think that future historians will find it curious that these alleged and purported and imagined sciences of society that supposedly are taking a scientific outlook on U.S. imperialism haven't really been able to figure out really what's going on in this country, not to mention the underlying forces. So there you have it.
Yeah, I just wanted to read the infiltration and spying that both Kalonji in his question and Dr. Horne also in his response have referred to. So I'm just going to read very quickly a paragraph that people can find in White Supremacy Confronted, the book that we referred to earlier, which actually talks about how the ADL and other members of the organization of Zionist lobby actually infiltrated some black organization and was spying on activists such as Horne, who was back then the president of the National Conference of Black Lawyers. Sorry. So on page 797, so it's a very long book that I really recommend people to read. So Dr. Horne writes, Israel, as a key ally of Pretoria over the years, had become a major antagonist of the ANC, as the grilling of Mandela in Manhattan suggested. Shortly thereafter, it was revealed that agents of Israel's closest domestic allies in the US, including the Anti-Defamation League, were monitoring anti-apartheid activism in Pretoria between 1987 and 1991 at minimum. The chief agent, Boy Bullock, seemed to be a freelance spy and provocateur. It turns out that in 1986, Bullock learned that the South African Consul General in Los Angeles was speaking in Las Vegas at a meeting organized by the Liberty lobbyist Willis Carter, an infamous anti-Semite. His arrival there led to a relationship with Pretoria, ties that also reveal his links to both the CIA and the Israeli intelligence. It turns out that I was one of those being monitored, surveillance which increased after I hosted a program featuring Chris Hani of the South African Communist Party and ANC in Los Angeles, where it may have been noticed that his security cordon was permeable, information that may have contributed to his subsequent assassination in South Africa. So this is on page 797 to 798 of White Supremacy Confronted. Isaac, want to proceed with the second question?
Sorry, I missed the question. What was the question?
Yeah, Isaac is going to ask you now, the second question.
Okay.
Oh, Boona was giving commentary, Dr. Horne.
I was just reading that quote, which I thought was very important.
You are correct. And I should have mentioned that point that you underscored at the end. That is to say, the poorest security for Chris Hani, which was evident to any of those who were at that fundraiser in Los Angeles. And of course, it's not coincidental that an agent of Pretoria was at that meeting and probably transmitted. Apparently, when he was out jogging, when he was assassinated, he didn't have security with him, for example. And this, it reminds me of the other security lapses that have afflicted those who are fighting Zionism, as evidenced most recently with the fact that apparently the security agencies of Hezbollah have been infiltrated by the Zionists, which led to the assassination of Mr. Nasrallah just a few days ago, not to mention the ability to put explosives and pagers and walkie-talkies. Obviously, there are serious security lapses that need to be attended to.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So now we wanted to talk about the so-called black anti-Semitism, which is one of the arguments that the Zionist lobby has been using for decades to discredit, demonize, and undermine black individuals and activists who've been critical of Israel. So in the same book, Dr. Horne, White Supremacy Confronted, and this is a quote that people can see on the screen, You also write that as Israel came under fire from African Americans for collusion with apartheid, charges of anti-Semitism rose accordingly. The Reverend Jesse Jackson became a repeated target for what the hardline Young Americans for Freedom called his, quote, anti-Jewish racist sentiments, unquote, and his, quote, active support of Soviet-backed terrorist groups, the ANC and SWAPO. SWAPO being the South West African People Organization that was fighting back then for the independence of Namibia. Interestingly, as Afro-Americans spoke out more vigorously about Palestine and Israel's collaboration with apartheid, there began to emerge more stories about perpetrated, quote, black anti-Semitism, though rarely was the real anti-Jewish fervor of Pretoria a topic in the mainstream press. So, Dr. Horne, can you explain how the whole narrative on so-called black anti-Semitism was used, has been constructed over the years and weaponized to prevent any criticism of the Zionist settler colonial state emanating from black people?
Well, what's curious about this entire story is that, once again, those who purport to be the scientists of society have not been able to figure out, as James Baldwin, the late great black writer, noticed some decades ago, that when you're talking allegedly about so-called black anti-Semitism, you're really talking, in essence, about a kind of reaction against white supremacy. That is to say, those who happen to be Jewish have been inducted into the hallowed halls of whiteness because of historical circumstance. They were oftentimes to be found, particularly in the early decades following the mass migration of poor European Jewish folk to North America in the late 19th century, early 20th century. They found themselves oftentimes living cheek by jowl with black people. By the way, the same has been the case for Arab Americans as well. And if we had more time, we could deal with some of the contradictions that have erupted between Arab Americans and black Americans. But in any case, because of the class hierarchy, which has been racialized in the United States of America, we oftentimes found in those early days that there were many Jewish people who were put in the position of being shopkeepers in black communities. That was the case in Los Angeles preceding the Watts Revolt of 1965, where you had the targeting of rapacious shopkeepers, which likewise was interpreted as anti-Jewish bigotry, but similarly could easily have been interpreted as a kind of class-based reaction or even as a kind of anti-white reaction. Similarly, with regard to black people being disproportionately renters as opposed to homeowners, that placed them in the position in certain cities of being exploited by landlords who were, quote, white, unquote, and many of whom happened to be Jewish. At the same time, however, I would be remiss if I failed to acknowledge a deeper history. That is to say, many scholars are beginning to interrogate this entire process whereby Christianity became the widespread faith of many enslaved Africans. Now, we know, of course, that going back about 1,800 years, you had Ethiopia or Abyssinia as a heavily Christian land. But of course, many of the enslaved Africans did not necessarily stem from Ethiopia, nor from that part of East Africa. And what happens is that, once again, Protestant London becomes the dominant force on this continent. And then after a lot of back and forth and to and fro, their faith then becomes implanted amongst many of the descendants of enslaved Africans. The book by the late historian Forrest Wood argues that Christianity doesn't become a dominant faith amongst black people in North America until after the Civil War. It's part of this process
post 1865 are trying to accommodate ourselves to U.S. nationality, which oftentimes involve adopting these British surnames, like Horne, for example, my surname. And so I say all this to say that if you look at the history of Christianity, it's no secret that Christianity is suffused and bathed with anti-Jewish fervor. That's the essence of why England, even before it descended into the Protestant sect in the 1530s, had expelled this Jewish population. If you look at the history of Catholicism in Western Europe, you'll find a long and bloody trail of anti-Jewish fervor, which culminates, as you know, in what's referred to as the Holocaust from the 1930s to the 1940s in Central and Eastern Europe. Oftentimes, by the way, perpetrated by Christians, either Catholics and or Protestants. And so I think that it's well past time, as we try to have a more accurate portrayal of history, for Black Americans to begin to interrogate this process whereby Christianity became the dominant faith in our community, or for that matter, how religion came to be dominant. Interestingly enough, there was an article in the New York Times just a few days ago, you may have seen it, that pointed out that the Black church is withering on the vine, and that if you go into a Black church nowadays, most of the parishioners are elderly, particularly elderly women, and younger folk are generally absent. And this is something, too, that requires interrogation. And by the way, on that same line, you mentioned in the introduction the fact that I do these interviews on KPFK Los Angeles. Just this past Saturday, we did an interview with the scholar Andrew Krinks, K-R-I-N-K-S. You can find the interview online, where he tries to connect racial capitalism, settler colonialism, and Christianity in helping to explicate this disgraceful episode in our long history whereby we are disproportionately incarcerated behind bars, for example. So once again, I'm happy to have this opportunity to try to dig a bit more deeply with regard to some of these phenomena. But I dare say that the tragedy is that this kind of discourse that we're having today is painfully absent, conspicuously absent from most platforms and venues. As I've said in other circumstances, it turns out that many of our fellow Black folk, they're very good at singing the blues, either figuratively or literally, not so adept and adroit at digging deeply to understand why we are singing the blues.
Wow. That's serious, Dr. Horne. I feel like you've been watching some of our episodes. You're talking about people singing the blues. I'm like,
some of them don't even sing; they lip sync.
Hey, you know, I want to ask you real quick, and forgive me, because you mentioned something earlier. You mentioned you talked about the head of the longshoremen,
Harold Daggett.
Harold Daggett. You know, it's interesting that he's cool with old Donald, and I'm wondering, with this strike, do you think that Donald's gonna somehow pop up and be part of the negotiation team? It's just a random. I could see it kind of, you know, going in that direction. Forgive me, I might have cut Isaac off, but I just caught this thought real quick, and I'm just like, you know, with all this going on right now, you know, nothing would surprise me with how these characters are moving. So it wouldn't
surprise me at all. I mean, both are mobbed up, right, as we know. And this also offers me the opportunity to draw a distinction between and amongst the dock workers. On the West Coast, the area stretching from Seattle to San Diego, historically, that has been a different union, the International Longshore and Warehousemen's Union, for example. The East Coast, where the dockers are now on strike, is the International Longshore Association, Interestingly enough, the East Coast dockers have been dominated by organized crime. Historically, the West Coast dockers were dominated by radicals. You may be familiar with Harry Bridges. He's discussed in my book on Hawaii, my second book on Hawaii, because they, of course, helped to turn the archipelago in the Pacific from a bastion of white supremacy into what is now the most progressive state in the United States of America, which of course is not saying that much, but still it happens to be the case. And Harry Bridges, of course, was well born in Melbourne, organized the San Francisco General Strike in 1934, which led to the formation of this union. The U.S. authorities tried to deport him repeatedly, but were not successful. He wound up dying in San Francisco in the 1980s. His union continues. You may be familiar, I'm sure you're familiar with Danny Glover, the actor and activist whose roots are in San Francisco, who has spoken glowingly of that union and its anti-racism, which of course contrasts with the International Longshore Association, which has been a fountainhead of racism. Guess who the NAACP chose to align with during a time when the West Coast Longshore were under siege and East Coast Longshore were surging, the latter taking place despite the fact that if you look at the Hollywood movie On the Waterfront with Marlon Brando, you get a very insightful depiction of the connections between organized crime and that particular union. I recommend that film, by the way. The NAACP, of course, aligned with the gangsters, not the anti-racists of the West Coast. That's repeated in my book, Armed Struggle, which helps to shed light on the political evolution of, thank you very much, of Southern California. So once again, I mean, there is so much to excavate and not enough time to do it in terms of trying to explicate how and why it is that so many of us find it necessary to sing the blues.
Dr. Horne, that was unfair, though, because everybody knows that Marlon Brando has always had more politics than NAACP. We can take that back to his associating with the Black Panther Party after the assassination of little Bobby Hutton. You can take that back to, I believe it was 1970 or 71 with the whole Academy Award situation when he brought Sasha, I believe it was Little Feather or Light Feather, to represent him. So we already knew that, you know, he had more politics than NAACP since before the NAACP became the NAACP. Anyway, I apologize for that. But I think that our good brother Isaac had a question. I might have cut him off because, you know, he looked like he didn't want to ask the question.
It was a good time to cut me off because I was going to, if we had time, ask that very same question in regards to that. So thank you, Kalanji. And no, you did not cut me off. Secretary of State Alexander M. Haig, you know, observation 30 years ago still kind of resonates today in the context of when he stated that Israel is the largest American aircraft carrier in the world and cannot be sunk, does not carry, quote unquote, any or does not carry even one American soldier and is located in a critical region for American national security. In the context of the genocidal campaign conducted by the Zionist settler colonial state in Palestine and now in Lebanon, some Black politicians have paid a heavy price for voicing their opposition to the genocide. You just recently mentioned Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman, both members of the so-called quote-unquote squad of Democratic Party, who have been calling for a ceasefire and an end to the genocide in Gaza, and have been defeated by primaries in which Zionist lobbies, particularly, you know, AIPAC, played a key role. In fact, Jamal Bowman's representation from the state of New York was ousted in the most expensive primary ever, with AIPAC and other pro-Israel groups investing over $14 million into it. In Missouri, AIPAC invested over $8.5 million to defeat Cori Bush, who, by the way, was Missouri's first Black female member of Congress. What kind of message is the Zionist lobby trying to send to Black politicians through the maneuvers? Is it a way to keep us in check? What the late Glenn Ford would call a quote unquote Black misleadership class?
Well, clearly that's the case. Look at Gregory Meeks, the CBC member, Congressional Black Caucus member from Southeast Queens, who has threatened sanctions against South Africa because it dragged the Israeli authorities into the International Court of Justice, which, of course, they've been litigating the case against South Africa, which has attracted the support of Chile and Turkey, amongst other nations. Obviously, relations between Pretoria and Washington are on a downturn because Pretoria has been a member of the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, which will be meeting in Russia within days. Will likely be accepting new members, and that will present a more formidable challenge to U.S. imperialism. And by the way, mentioning this also allows me to do another critique of some of our friends on the left. Now, you have these so-called scholars of the U.S. left who denounce and castigate what they call campism. I'm a campus, I guess, because, as I said, if BRICS had individual membership, I would join the BRICS, for example. Obviously, they don't understand history, because if they understood history, they'd recognize that enslaved Africans in North America, the way we've been able to advance to where we are today, was associated with the abolitionist camp led by revolutionary Haiti, for example, by associating with the camp of national liberation in the Caribbean and Africa, assisted by the socialist countries. I guess they just expect us to seek support within this white supremacist United States and continually be rebuffed, if not pulverized. And I guess they would find that satisfactory, I guess. I mean, and these are people who consider themselves to be radical, even, believe it or not. I mean, they have journals. They have periodicals. I mean, it's quite astonishing in retrospect, but not so astonishing if one considers that they're having real difficulty in ascertaining and figuring out the settler colonialism, a term that's conspicuously absent from their vocabulary. They oftentimes castigate people like myself as being a stalwart of so-called identity politics. I'm not sure what that means, but obviously it has no meaning, because I've never heard the term identity politics applied to Zionism, for example. I mean, you have many, but not exclusively, Jewish Americans who are invested in a state, Israel, artificial creation based upon an ethno-religious identity. Now, if that's not identity politics, I don't know what is. But somehow identity politics is not applied to Israel, it's applied to those of us who've suffered under the lash of anti-Blackness, which has been a historic component of settler colonialism, North American style. And just as a footnote before I pass the mic back, you mentioned Marlon Brando. I would also recommend the film that he starred in, directed by the Italian director Pontecorvo, Pontecorvo, a burn, exclamation point, which deals with a Haitian-style revolution in the Caribbean, with Marlon Brando playing a traducer quite well in that particular film. And of course, Pontecorvo also was behind the Battle of Algiers, which the Black Panther Party used to use for political education. As a matter of fact, during the Panther 21 case, and I'm sure you're familiar with this since your comrade Dhoruba Ben Wahad was involved in this case, the prosecution actually showed scenes from the Battle of Algiers because the jury was supposed to infer, because in this dramatization, people were assassinating settlers and colonizers, that you could draw the inference that when the Panthers used that film in political education, they were going to use that as a blueprint for liberating themselves from settler colonialism, North American style. It's quite astonishing in retrospect. And by the way, in that book, Armed Struggle, which deals predominantly with Southern California, I have notes on the Panther 21 case. and recount the story of using the Battle of Algiers by Pontecorvo as a way to prosecute the comrades.
That was serious. Yes.
Sorry, Dr. Horne, can you remind us the name of the movie?
Oh, the Battle of Algiers, that one?
No, the other one that you mentioned.
Burn! Exclamation point.
Okay. No, I was wondering because I think the original name was in Portuguese, right? Queimado, something like that.
Yeah, Queimado. Sure. That's the name of the fictional Caribbean island.
Yeah.
You know, Dr. Horne, we got to forgive Boona because Boona want to always go back to the original colonizer. He's like,
no.
Listen, let's not give this colonizer any credit. Let's give the original colonizer the credit.
No, I haven't actually watched the movie, but I've first time I heard about the movie was the original title. Anyway, that was just
and you know, to your point, Dr. Horne, when you talk about the Battle of Algiers, for me, when I'm dealing with any of my students, the Battle of Algiers to me would be sort of like the soundtrack, if you will, to The Wretched of the Earth. And I feel like I would always recommend both because I think that although it's a fictional dramatization, it is definitely I can see why the state would reach and say, okay, this is what they're attempting to do right here, because the Algerians, they gave their colonizers, sorry, Boona, they gave the French the business. And I think that, it's something that, that can definitely be studied. And I can see a version, a Palestinian style version to come in the future, or one involving Hezbollah, or, a fictional version, because it kind of like, it's along that same groove, in my opinion. So anyway.
Yeah, I recommend that film. I mean, I recommend that film. Fortunately, during that era of upheaval and turmoil of so many decades ago, that a number of cinematic contributions emerged, amongst which we can include the Battle of Algiers, Burn, and so many others.
Yes, sir. Boona, you have another question before? I know we holding Dr. Horne hostage. He said he had 10 minutes on the show with us today, but
yeah, that's the last question. Okay. So the assault on Black solidarity of Palestine seems to have intensified at the moment when several African Americans, and this is a point that you've raised on several occasions, including in the clip that we played right before we started the show today. So several African Americans are playing a key role in the U.S. imperialist apparatus. Right, you have several African Americans who have key position in the U.S. Administration. So we can think of, obviously, hopefully I pronounce her name correctly because otherwise some people won't be very happy. Who is the Vice President and Democratic nominee for the presidential election? Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, also an African American. The Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, Charles Q. Brown, also an African. And obviously the African American woman who's responsible for raising her hand whenever the U.S. has to put her veto at the United Nations for ceasefires in Palestine, for example, Thomas Green. So as a final question, I'll ask you, what is your advice to Black activists and organizations who want to perpetuate the internationalist and anti-colonial legacy of anti-colonial international leaders such as the late Paul Robeson, Shirley Graham Du Bois, W.B. Du Bois. These are, of course, people you've written biographies about, and many other figures. We can think of Alphonse Hanton and many others. So these are figures, Black African Americans who have not surrendered to what you've called in many of your books, articles, interviews, the Compromise of 1954, meaning the deal that was struck between sections of the Black bourgeoisie and U.S. imperialism. So what is your advice to people who want to keep expressing their solidarity with the Palestinian people and colonized people, despite the assault the Zionist lobby and also U.S. imperialist apparatus?
Well, obviously, we're going to have to proceed organizationally. That is to say, we need to influence existing organizations in our community and build simultaneously organizations that presently do not exist. That is to say that we should not rule out the possibility of seeking to influence our largest mass organizations, including the NAACP, which has been in existence since 1909, and as my previous comments suggested, basically signed on to anti-communism, signed on to right-wing opportunism. But as the crisis deepens in this country, which I think will become ever more evident with every passing day, we should not rule out the possibility of bringing the NAACP back to a time, which I've also written about, in the 1930s and the 1940s, when they were more open to working with folks on the left. But at the same time, we need and should not rule out the possibility of building new organizations, as difficult as that may be. For example, I just wrote this book, as you know, about the Black Panther Party, which flashed across the sky like a meteor, roughly between 1966 and, let's say arbitrarily, 1978, 1979. It exhibited internationalism, it exhibited militancy, it exhibited anti-sexism to a certain degree. Of course, it got waylaid by this fascination with the lumpen, which I won't go into detail now about, but even if you look at that fascination with the lumpen, that was largely a byproduct, as I tell the story, of their lack of confidence in the U.S. working class. Now, of course, they could not necessarily figure out why there was a lack of confidence in the U.S. working class. Of course, I would ascribe it to the class collaborationism that you have seen in the upper reaches of the Teamsters, that you have seen in the International Longshore Association. And by the way, I wish them well with regard to the strike on the U.S. East Coast from Maine through Florida westward to Houston. Although, given the right-wing opportunism that has infected that union, do not be surprised if the strike does not end well for the members, but still, I wish them well. I hope that they win that strike, which brings me to another aspect of the story in terms of what is to be done. That is to say that you have more Black people in unions than you do in organizations like the NAACP, particularly in the Service Employees International Union, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. We are disproportionately represented in public sector unions, that is to say, unions that are the collective bargaining agent for those who toil on behalf of the U.S. government. I'm thinking of the U.S. postal workers, for example. You may recall the scene from the movie Hollywood Shuffle about this young Black filmmaker whose comrades and friends tell him that, why are you pursuing Hollywood when you can get a job at the post office? And that of course, reflects the fact that historically we have been overrepresented in that branch of government. And by the way, in a few days, I'll be interviewing a scholar who has unveiled the point that during the early days of Washington, D.C., in the early 1800s, Thomas Jefferson and the other U.S. authorities sought vigorously to bar free Negro workers from working in the post office because they thought that it would give them access to messages and confidential reports and abolitionist literature, etc. So obviously that didn't work, since now we're overrepresented in the post office. But in any case, I highly and thoroughly recommend folks working through their unions and seeking to influence their unions, not ruling out the possibility running for office in their unions, because when you run for office in a union, you can gain access to an immense treasury, by the way. As a matter of fact, you cannot begin to understand anti-racist struggles in the United States without understanding companion pro-union struggles. Because what was happening on the one hand was that Black people were flocking into the ranks of the United Auto Workers, for example, and then making sure that the United Auto Workers were direct part of their treasury to anti-racist struggles south of the Mason-Dixon line, that is to say in the Deep South, in Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi, for example. So I think the path is clear as to what needs to be done. The question really becomes, do we have the mettle? Do we have the consciousness to execute the route that needs to be pursued?
We appreciate you always driving it all the way home. And as a former organizer with the SEIU in the early 90s, I can definitely co-sign what you're saying. And I think that, you know, many organizations can learn a lot from union organizing. I think that oftentimes that level of organizing is overlooked, particularly because of the players, you know, and most Africans here in America, when they think of unions, they think of Jimmy Hoffa. In fact, we all have been Jimmy Hoffa to a great extent. You know, we're all absent without leave. We're all buried somewhere under Yankee Stadium or wherever they said he's at. But anyway, we definitely appreciate you coming on as always. And you know, we heard a rumor that you're going to be coming on more often. I don't know. I'm just, you know, I'm just a messenger trying to figure out what's going on here. You know,
well, I don't know if you're allowed to discuss this live, but yeah, this is something that we're working on.
Okay.
You know, a monthly program that, you know, will allow us to dig deeper into his work.
Okay.
It will take probably years because, you know, he's written probably almost 60 books now. I think it's 59. Last time I counted. So
Boona's always the accountant when it comes to your book. We ask him about time, like what time he's supposed to come on, he can't count. I don't understand this, but it's cool though. You know?
And by the way, just a footnote, I found the title of the book that Dr. Horne was referring to. So the book by Andrew Crinks. So it's titled "White Property, Black Racism, and the Religious Function of Mass Criminalization." I'm going to add that to my reading list, although, you know, I have so many books by Dr. Gerald Horne himself.
Well, listen to the interview I did with him. It's only 20 minutes.
Oh, okay. So that interview, once again, to our agents, it can be found on the kpfk.org and also the Activist News Network YouTube channel. So,
Yes,
right on.
So definitely we appreciate you coming on. And, you know, as always, you're welcome to, you know, kick your feet up here at Black Power Media Reloaded. And again, thank you for, as Isaac's people would say, thank you for your service.
Right on.
Right on, brother.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
All right, good luck. Bye-bye.
Thank you. You're checking out the Rise Up Morning Show. That was Dr. Gerald Horne, live and direct. And as always, we're looking forward to more information coming. I think Boona just suggested that he may be coming on once a month. Is that correct, Boona? Is that what you just said?
Yeah, that's what you're working on.
Okay.
You know, that's the type of information that I'm hiding because.
You're hiding it. Okay. All right.
Well, it's a secret project that should not be disclosed.
We're not going to tell nobody else. But anyway.
Yeah, but hopefully we'll start the first episode of the new program. So,
okay.
Yeah,
okay.
hopefully it'll be monthly.
Okay, right on. Well, we're looking forward to that. If it's your first time tuning in, or if it's not your first time tuning in, make sure you subscribe to Black Power Media Reloaded. Black Power Media Reloaded. We have a ton of different shows. Yesterday, Professor Griff dropped yet another one, and ain't no telling what he was talking about. I didn't get to check him this time, whatever. But you know, definitely shout out to Professor Griff. Also to our new Political Prisoner show, which airs at 1 p.m. Eastern. On Wednesdays, Professor Griff's show is at noon, 12 noon Eastern here on Black Power Media Reloaded. And he'll also be kicking off another show on Mondays at the same time. Yeah, so he's going to be giving you a double dose each week. Make sure you tune in to the Rise Up International Morning Show every Tuesday through Friday. We've been kind of AWOL on the Tuesday shows. You know what I'm saying? We've been having time issues. Folks forget what time it is when it comes to Tuesdays, but it's okay. Definitely Tuesdays through Fridays. You can check us out on the Rise Up International Morning Show. Also, a good brother Isaac Jasper has a few new projects, new shows that are dropping. Can you tell us about that, sir?
Yeah, so I got Decolonial Parallels, where we break down certain movies that have certain ties to the DoD, Department of Defense, i.e. the Pentagon. Just locked in Dr. Matthew Alford for us to do kind of like what we're going to be doing with Gerald Horne. We come on every so often, have about a 30-minute conversation about certain shows, break those down, and the show's called Is It Imperial Funded? Is it funded? Yes or no? So we're still kind of working on the name and whatnot, but kind of, you know, just making it real cheesy, but at the same time real rooted in decolonial theory. Another show that should be coming up as well is my personal show that I do that I was going to be calling What Grinds My Gears, but it's just going to be the Indigenous Nightmare podcast, and that's going to be airing on not just my network, but I'm also going to be putting it on BPM as well. I'm going to out this video today, you guys, this will be available for my viewers today as well on the network. So, you know, I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation and the faces that you guys see. We work in reciprocity with each other. This is what collective solidarity. This is what guerrilla broadcast journalism looks like. Is we share everything basically.
we definitely appreciate that and honor Buna, because we can't afford to keep him 1 minute past. Because we do. he charges double, so he be getting 0.0.0 if he has to work any further. Anyway, we appreciate you all checking us out.
Making me work, but you're not feeding me, so I have to go have dinner, you know.
Hey man, we damn sure ain't feeding you. Go eat your food. Anyway, be safe.
Dinner time, but I have to go have lunch. You know, I'm so hungry. I don't even know what time it is now.
This brother's confused. We're on the morning show. He having dinner. I don't know where he at. He in Mars somewhere. I think he was in France a couple of days ago. But anyway, that's Dr. Horne Jr. right there, folks. But anyway, make sure you tune in. Black Power Media, Rise Up Morning Show. We'll see you tomorrow. Peace.
Sometimes the riot is a quiet one, or the battle is to love yourself and function in society where voices of reason are muted by anxiety, like gaining notoriety is selling your soul. So we tend to go no deeper than the shallow water level, trying to keep us overhead in the face of all the slurs and the stares, mentally frozen, paralyzed by fear of failure and success. So we lock, stock, barrel, running while it's crumbling. All these towers and they're babbling, but the baby's in the bath and the stash under the bed on my head, spinning from the circles and the puppets and the strings that they pull. Then we move. Reactionary warfare never produces winners on the field. Feeble and foolish. What tools and what weapons are we using? We need some new ones. Real revolution. It's real solutions. But we've taken on the ways of the ones who conquer with their guns and religion and